The sun hung low and heavy over the barren camp, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Sweat mixed with grit on every face as soldiers shuffled toward the med tent, some limping, some clutching arms, others with pale faces etched in pain. The air was thick with exhaustion and tension. Yet in the midst of the chaos, there was one figure who moved with a calm that seemed almost unnatural. They called her the Med Tent Girl, though no one really knew her name or where she came from. She wore the faded colors of the army, but carried herself like a shadow, slipping through the noise unseen, but always present. Her hands were steady as she worked tirelessly, stitching torn flesh and wrapping aching limbs, but her eyes betrayed a depth of experience that went far beyond what anyone expected. The soldiers whispered in hushed tones about her quiet intensity, wondering what kind of life she had led to become so skilled, so composed in the face of so much pain. But she never answered. She never revealed more than what was necessary. She was like a secret wound herself, hidden beneath layers of silence and solitude. The med tent was a world apart from the brutality outside. Its canvas walls shielded the injured from the relentless sun. But inside, there was no relief from the suffering. The groans of the wounded mixed with the sharp orders of medics and the rustle of bandages being torn and reapplied. The med tent girl moved through it all with the grace of someone who had seen too much yet refused to be broken. Each patient was treated with a fierce tenderness, as if she was fighting to save more than just bodies, but something deeper, something sacred. Her past was a mystery, and that mystery kept the soldiers both intrigued and cautious. Some said she was a lost soul searching for redemption. Others whispered that she had been part of elite units no one dared speak of openly. The truth was buried deep beneath the surface like a landmine waiting to explode. But no one pushed too hard because beneath her quiet exterior was an undeniable strength that commanded respect. Without a word, as the sun dipped lower, the camp grew restless. Rumors began to ripple through the ranks of enemy movements, shadows slipping closer under the cover of night. The med tent girl felt the shift in the air, a cold warning that something was coming, and it was not just another battle wound she would have to face. Her fingers tightened around a worn medical kit, the only piece of her past she allowed to remain visible. It was old, battered, and stained, but it was hers a lifeline and a reminder of battles fought far from this dusty camp. She paused for a moment, looking out beyond the tent where the fading light caught the silhouettes of weary soldiers standing guard. The weight of their silent prayers and unspoken fears pressed down like the thick dust that settled on everything around them. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, knowing that the coming hours would test every ounce of her courage and skill. No one else saw the flicker of pain behind her steady gaze, the memories clawing at the edges of her mind like ghosts from another life. The missions in faraway lands, the friends lost in silence, the secrets carried like scars beneath her skin. All those things had shaped the woman who stood in the med tent today. The healer, the warrior, the silent guardian of those who fought and bled for a cause bigger than themselves. The med tent girl straightened her back and prepared herself for the long night ahead. There would be no rest, no room for weakness, only the relentless march of survival and the hope that somehow through the darkness she could make a difference. She was just the med tent girl to those around her, but beneath the surface, she was so much more a force waiting to be unleashed when the time came and the world demanded her true self. The wind whispered through the camp, carrying distant sounds like a warning and a promise. The med tent girl tightened the strap of her bag and stepped back into the swirling chaos, ready to face whatever storm was coming her way, knowing that the night held more than just pain and fear, but the chance for secrets to be revealed and legends to be born. The camp lay quiet, but the silence was brittle and full of tension. The med tent girl moved among the sleeping soldiers, her steps light, but her mind racing. Rumors had spread like wildfire. Enemy forces were closing in faster and closer than anyone had expected. The soldiers whispered in tents and around small fires, voices low and shaky with fear and uncertainty. But the med tent girl felt a deeper storm brewing beneath the surface, one that went beyond the coming battle. She found a quiet corner, near the tent flap, and knelt down, pulling out her worn kit. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, packing bandages, saline, and painkillers, but beneath the surface her fingers trembled ever so slightly. A memory flickered in her mind. A flash of a distant battlefield where she had faced death and betrayal. The weight of those moments pressed down on her now, as if the ghosts of the past were reaching out to warn her of what was to come. The generals arrived soon after, their stiff collars and rigid gazes barely masking the fear hidden in their eyes. They spoke in clipped tones and sharp commands, but their confidence was brittle, like statues carved from stone. They moved through the camp, unaware that the ground beneath them was shifting. They saw the med tent girl as just a healer, nothing more, but she knew the truth. Her calm exterior was a fragile mask hiding a storm of preparation and strategy born from years of combat experience. The air crackled with tension as night began to fall. Shadows lengthened and darkness crept in, swallowing the edges of the camp. The med tent girl stood at the edge of the med tent, watching the horizon. Her breath came slow and steady as she scanned the blackened landscape for any sign of movement. Her heart pounded not just with fear, but with a fierce determination. She knew this was no ordinary night, and the wounds she would face were not only physical. A sudden noise shattered the fragile quiet, a distant crack like the snap of a twig or the first warning shot. The soldiers sprang to their feet, tension exploding into chaos. The med tent girl grabbed her bag, tightening the strap across her chest. Her training kicked in instantly, instincts honed in countless battles flooding back. She moved with a silent urgency, weaving through the camp, checking on the wounded, calming the scared, her voice firm and steady despite the storm raging inside. Her mind raced with strategies not just for healing, but for survival. She recalled tactics from her secret past missions behind enemy lines, places where every decision meant life or death. Every shadow could hide a threat, and every breath could be the last. The med tent girl was not just a healer tonight. She was a sentinel standing guard. Between life and destruction, the generals gathered in a tense circle, their faces pale as they tried to formulate a plan. The med tent girl listened from the sidelines, her eyes sharp, catching details. They missed. Their plans were flawed, their assumptions dangerous. She fought the urge to speak out to reveal the depth of her knowledge, but she held back, waiting for the right moment to change the tide. Outside the camp, the wind whispered secrets of the coming storm. The med tent girl felt a chill run down her spine, a warning echoing from the darkest corners of her memory. She tightened her grip on her kit and prepared for the night ahead, knowing that the battlefield was not just a place of bullets and blood, but a crucible where the past and present would collide, and the true measure of courage would be revealed. She glanced once more at the sleeping soldiers, their faces peaceful but unaware of the danger closing in. The med tent girl whispered a silent vow to protect them no matter the cost. For she was more than just the med tent girl tonight. She was the last line of defense, the silent warrior ready to face the shadows lurking beyond the camp and the secrets waiting to be uncovered when the battle finally began. The night shattered with a sudden crashing sound, like the sky itself had cracked. The general was on the ground one moment, standing proud and commanding, and the next collapsing like a fallen giant. The camp erupted into chaos, soldiers shouting, medics rushing with frantic energy. But in the middle of the storm, the med tent girl moved with deadly calm. She pushed through the crowd, heart pounding but hands steady. She reached the general in seconds, his face pale, his breath shallow, his skin was clammy cold, as if life was slipping through invisible cracks. The other medics hesitated, unsure of what to do, but she stepped forward like a force of nature taking control, her eyes sharp scanning for signs of stroke or poisoning. Time slowed, and the world narrowed to the sharp intake of breath and the rapid beating of her own pulse. Her training kicked in without hesitation, years of experience guiding every motion. She checked the general's airway, his pulse, and began emergency measures, rarely used in the camp. Her fingers worked quickly, applying pressure, monitoring vitals, whispering commands to herself to stay focused, to fight harder. The soldiers around them watched in stunned silence, amazed at the fierce determination radiating from the woman they had always underestimated. The med tent girl was no longer invisible, no longer just a shadow behind the scenes. She was a lifeline, a warrior battling against the invisible enemy of death itself. The general's eyes fluttered, but did not fully open. She would have to keep fighting, keep pushing past exhaustion and fear. The night air grew thick with tension as every second stretched like an eternity. The med tent girl felt the weight of countless battles bearing down on her. The memories of missions, where failure meant death, and the screams of lost comrades echoed in her mind. She summoned every ounce of strength, every lesson learned in distant wars and secret operations. Her hands moved with the precision of a seasoned soldier, a healer who understood the fragility of life and the brutal truth of war. Around her, the camp held its breath, waiting, watching, waiting for the miracle they barely dared hope for. The general coughed weakly, a flicker of life returning to his body. The med tent girl allowed herself a brief glance of relief, but she knew the fight was far from over. The injury was severe, the danger still looming like a shadow on the edge of the camp. Suddenly a sharp shout rang out, signaling enemy. Forces were closing in. The med tent girl snapped back into battle mode, rallying the medics and soldiers around her. She organized an urgent evacuation plan, triaging the wounded while securing the med tent. Her voice was a steady beacon cutting. Through panic and confusion, her orders crisp and clear. The camp transformed from chaos to coordinated defense with her at the center. The general was stabilized enough to be moved, but every step was a race against time. The med tent girl carried not just the weight of the wounded, but the hopes of an entire army. She was no longer just a caretaker. She was the heart of the camp, its shield and its sword. As enemy fire crackled closer, the med tent girl stood firm, refusing to falter. Her secret past was no longer hidden, but revealed in every decisive action. Every brave choice, she had been forged in the fires of combat, and now her true self emerged, shining fierce and unyielding in the darkest hour. The battle for survival had begun, and she was ready to face it head on. The camp was silent, except for the low hum of whispered questions and stunned murmurs. The med tent girl stood apart from the crowd, no longer just a healer, but a revelation. Her hands trembled slightly as she revealed pieces of her hidden past, a story few had expected to hear. The soldiers gathered close, their eyes wide with disbelief and growing respect. She spoke softly, at first fragments of a life forged in fire and blood, missions deep behind enemy lines where silence was survival, and every step could mean death. Her words painted pictures of brutal firefights, narrow escapes, and the unbearable weight of loss. Friends lost without ceremony, wounds that ran deeper than skin scars etched into her soul. She was not the fragile caregiver they imagined, but a battle-hardened warrior who had chosen the shadows over glory. Her voice grew stronger as she described the day she took a vow to protect not just lives, but the honor of those who could no longer fight. The med tent was no accident. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could fight in a different way, wielding compassion as fiercely as any weapon. She revealed the truth behind the quiet strength that had kept the camp alive in its darkest hours. The soldiers listened, rapt, unable to reconcile the gentle healer they had seen with the fierce warrior who stood before them. The silence was broken by a murmur of awe and then a ripple of applause that grew louder until it filled the air. Her secret was no longer hers alone. It was a bond shared by every man and woman who had fought beside her. The generals approached cautiously, their eyes sharp with questions and newfound respect. The med-tent girl met them without fear, her posture proud and unyielding. She was no longer a shadow in the background, but a force to be reckoned with. Her knowledge of tactics and combat medicine gave her a voice in the strategies that would shape the coming battle. She outlined plans drawing on her secret training and battlefield experience, every word precise, every detail vital. The camp absorbed her words like a lifeline, clinging to hope in the face of overwhelming odds. Her presence became a rallying point, a source of strength that lifted the spirits of soldiers, worn down by fear and fatigue. Outside the med tent, the wind carried whispers of change. The enemy was closing in, but so was something else. The med tent girl was no longer just a caretaker. She was the living embodiment of resilience and courage. The wounds she healed were more than physical. They were the fractures of hope and will in a war that demanded everything as night deepened the camp, prepared for the fight ahead. The med tent girl moved through the tents, checking on the wounded, speaking quietly with those who doubted or despaired. Her touch was gentle, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. She was the spark in the darkness, the silent promise that no one would face the coming storm alone. Her story spread through. The camp carried on the breath of every soldier, from whispered conversations to the bold proclamations of commanders. The med-tent girl had become a legend, a symbol of strength born from pain and sacrifice. Her secret was revealed, but it had only made her more formidable, more real, more impossible to forget. The war was far from over, but the camp was changed forever. By the quiet warrior who had hidden in plain sight, the healer who had become a hero, and the fierce spirit who refused to be. Broken, the med-tent girl was no longer a mystery, but a beacon lighting the way through the darkest night. The camp was alive with restless energy, fueled by the med-tent girl's newfound role, her voice cutting through the chaos like a sharpened blade. Every command she gave was met with swift action, soldiers and medics alike drawing strength from her. Unwavering resolve. The general, stable but weak, depended on her steady hands and clear mind, and the enemy was pressing harder, testing every line, every defense. She moved through the camp like a sentinel, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, searching for weakness. Her past had taught her that danger often came when least expected, that survival was won by those who prepared for the worst. She coordinated medical teams training soldiers in basic first aid and emergency response, transforming fear into confidence, turning chaos into order. The med-tent girl was no longer just a healer. She had become a leader, a symbol of hope in a place where despair often took root. Her calm in crises became a shield for those who fought and bled for their lives. Her voice carried across the camp, rallying the wounded, the weary, and the frightened, reminding them that surrender was not an option. The enemy advanced under the cloak of darkness, but the camp stood firm, bolstered by the med-tent girl's fierce determination. The nights were long and brutal, with bursts of gunfire, screams, and the pounding of boots every moment, a test of endurance and will. She moved tirelessly from patient to patient, never allowing exhaustion to dull her focus. Her hands steady, her heart resolute. Her secret past continued to influence every decision, every strategy she offered. She knew the importance of swift evacuations, triage zones, and secure perimeters. Lessons learned in hidden battlefields, far from this dusty war zone. She taught the medics to anticipate injuries, to think like warriors, as well as healers, preparing them for the worst while holding on to hope. The soldiers began to see her not just as their medic, but as the backbone of their survival. The eye whispered stories of her hidden life inspired courage, giving them strength to stand when the night seemed darkest. Her presence was a rallying cry, a promise that no matter how fierce the storm, she would be there to catch them if they fell. The general regained some strength and insisted on meeting with her face to face. The meeting was brief, but charged with mutual respect. He recognized in her not just a healer, but a strategist, a warrior who had saved his life and the lives of countless others. His words carried weight, shifting the camp hierarchy and cementing her role as a vital leader. Every victory, no matter how small, was a testament to her leadership. Every life saved a quiet triumph over the relentless tide of war. The med tent girl had risen from the shadows to become a beacon of resilience, a living testament to the power of courage and sacrifice. Her story was no longer whispered in secret but shouted from the rooftops, inspiring all who heard it. As the battle raged on, the med tent girl stood unyielding, a pillar of strength and hope. The scars of her past fueled her determination, her silence transformed into a roar of defiance. Her legacy was being forged in the fires of conflict, a legend born not just of wounds, but of unbreakable spirit and unshakable will. The war was far from over, but with her standing strong, the camp had found its heart, its soul, and its fiercest protector. The war dragged on, relentless and unforgiving, but the med tent girl had become more than a healer, more than a shadow behind the scenes. She was a symbol of strength, a living legend, whose story spread like wildfire through the ranks soldiers sought her out not just to mend broken bones, but to draw from the well of courage she embodied. Her presence transformed the med tent from a place of mere survival into a fortress of hope and resilience. Each day brought new challenges, wounds deeper and fears darker, but she met them all with the same fierce determination. Her hands moved with practiced grace, patching bodies and stitching souls, her eyes always scanning the horizon for threats seen and unseen. The soldiers whispered her name with reverence, the med tent girl who had saved a general, who carried the weight of countless battles in her silent strength. Her secret past was no longer hidden. It had become the foundation of her legend. A warrior forged in fire and silence, whose sacrifices had shaped the fate of many. Her story was told around campfires beneath star-filled skies, shared in hushed voices by those who had witnessed her courage firsthand. She was a beacon in the darkest nights, a reminder that even in war, there was hope and heart. The med tent girl continued to lead, inspiring not only through skill, but through an unbreakable will that refused to bow. She trained others, imparting lessons learned on blood-soaked battlefields, teaching them to fight for life as fiercely. As for victory, every soldier who passed through her care carried a piece of her strength into the fight. As battles raged, the camp grew tighter, bound by shared struggle and unwavering faith in their silent guardian. The med tent girl moved through the chaos like a force of nature, calm, unyielding, and fiercely protective. Her presence was a promise that no matter how dire the odds, there was a warrior who would stand between life and death, one day long after the worst of the fighting had passed. The general returned to the med tent, his steps slow but steady. He approached her with gratitude and respect, his voice thick with emotion. He spoke of the lives she had saved, the hope she had kindled, and the legacy she had created. His words were not just thanks, but a recognition of the warrior she had always been. The med tent girl listened quietly, knowing that her journey was far from over. But in that moment, she allowed herself a rare glimpse of peace, a silent acknowledgement that the secrets she had carried for so long were now a source of strength, not burden. Her past no longer a shadow, but a light, guiding her forward. The camp eventually quieted, but the story of the med tent girl lived on, carried in the hearts and minds of all who had seen her courage and compassion. Her legacy was not just in the wounds she healed, but in the spirit she ignited in a place where hope seemed almost impossible. She was the healer, the warrior, the legend born from blood, pain, and unwavering will, and though the war had scarred the land and the souls of those who fought it, the Med Tent Girl stood as a testament to the power of resilience and sacrifice. Her story a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are fought in silence, and that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places. The Med Tent Girl was no longer just a name, but a legend, etched forever in the annals of those who dared to fight and survive.